Parents of Reddit, what's the most embarrassing thing your children have done in public? One of my children loves to shoot the finger guns. One day I'm talking to a neighbor and he casually strolls up and stops to ask if I enjoyed the finger banging he gave me in the shower earlier. I was grocery shopping with my daughter. Then two-ish. She's sitting in the cart and starts squinting one eye and yelling "Ah," like a pirate. Does this a few times. I turn to pick something off the shelf and see a man behind me wearing an eye patch. Oops. My son was at the park playing with a little boy and they were having a great time when he suddenly yells to me across the park. "Look mom. I have a black friend now." I told this story before. But when my middle son was around 3, he would constantly point at different people and say pen 15 if it was a guy and vag if it was a girl. We tried to get him to stop saying the words in public, but eventually figured it would make more sense to not make a big deal out of it and wait for him to get tired of it and stop. We were at the mall one day and the cashier was ambiguous looking. I myself wasn't entirely sure of their gender until I saw her name tag. My son looks at her and says, "Pen 15 or vag? Which one?" Surprisingly she didn't seem offended and said, "I'm a girl." To which my son responded, "Oh. Vag." The cashier was a great sport about it and laughed it off. I can laugh about it now. But I avoided that store for a while after that. I did snack run with my nephew. He is 3. He is curious about the world around him. He asked a black woman if her butt is black. Not the parent in this situation. But my mom says this is definitely her most embarrassing one. We went to my brother's basketball game one day. Bleachers were packed. She turned her back for a second to help me with something. Suddenly she hears "Oh my god," and turns around to see my 3-year-old sister has stripped down and is running around naked, happily waving her hand shouting "Wee" in front of 100+ people. Not a parent. But my sister was at church one Sunday and our minister did a weekly children's message to get the kids more involved in the service. This particular week he was discussing enemies and how we should treat them. He asked all the kids what do we do to our enemies, and having grown up playing with my brother, which a lot of the time was some sort of pretend army guys sort of thing, she replied "we heal them." I imagine my parents were pretty mortified. My niece asked a short man with dwarfism if his pen 15 touched the floor. The week before she had been to a farm and one of the animals had a very long erection that in fact touched the floor. Unfortunately we were in a small elevator at the time going to the 32th floor. Nice long ride. I thought my nephew was clapping his hands behind and turned to see what he was so happy about, and he was apparently slapping a bald guy's head instead. This is the same kid that hid underneath an extremely obese man's stomach. He sat on his feet and tucked himself in really well. I do not have kids, not gonna do it. I have 4 kids. 3 boys and 1 girl. My daughter is the youngest. She is 2 and we recently started working on potty training with her. She asked to go to the bathroom at a restaurant, so I obviously took her. She started asking if she could try standing up to pee like her brothers. I explained that she can't because she doesn't have a pen 15. She started screaming, "I want a pen 15. Give me a pen 15." Over and over and over again. Pretty embarrassing. As an infant, my daughter had insanely loud and foul old man farts. So loud and so heinous that one would be hesitant to believe such wretched nonsense could come from anyone other than the adult she was with. At 2, she pointed to every Target symbol as we walked through the store and exclaimed, "Boobies." At 3, she asked a rotund woman who looked to be in her 50s exactly how many babies she had in her belly, prompted by the fact that I was pregnant with my son at the time. At 4, she told people who were smoking at building entrances that they smelled bad and were killing her lungs. Every time. I could keep going. But you'd just think my kid is an asshole and she's really not. But she kind of is sometimes. My young nephew confused the word punching with fisting and announced to the world his older brother won't stop fisting him. My father-in-law was at the store with his youngest daughter, who I think was like 3 or 4 at the time. and they got in line to be checked out. And she was running around and went between his legs and accidentally headbutt his groin and exclaimed she couldn't pronounce her R's well. Mind you. Dad Yawawino hit me in the face. Then stood in silent contemplation and said, "It's okay, Daddy. I love Yawawino." He was absolutely mortified. Friend story. Waiting in line with his dad at a grocery store in front of a rotund lady when he was about 4. Looks up at lady. Lady smiles down at him. He stares for a second and flatly states, "You're fat." I took my 4-year-old daughter, who is hard of hearing, to the local branch of the public library. After a bit, she said she had to use the restroom. The restrooms were at the front, near the checkout. The branch wasn't very big. Since we'd been to the library often, we let her go by herself. A few minutes later, I hear singing. The whole library hears singing. And lol grunting. I'm so embarrassed. Mortified. Really. I later learned from my wife that she trained our kiddo to sing when she went to the restroom so we'd know where she was and that she's okay. Edit. Changed here to here. I was a child. When I was 6. I didn't know what being gay was. Only that it was a really big deal if you were gay. Naturally. Then, being a little sheet, I used to scream out "I'm gay" when we were out in public and I didn't want to be there. This includes out of car windows, at pedestrians, and inside of Walmart multiple times. Kids will always find ways to embarrass their parents in public. The most brutal one I ever heard was at a seminar. The speaker said she had to wait in line at a crowded place once. Her 5-year-old daughter was just kind of hanging on to her and walking in circles around her. She wasn't misbehaving or anything and was actually kind of cute until, all of a sudden, she looked up at her mom with a gross look on her face and, loud enough for everyone to hear, says, "Mommy, your vag stinks." I'll do one per kid. Thankfully I only have 2 kids right now. My 4-year-old daughter is a very polite, very well-spoken little girl. But she's also very blunt. So we're in the Winko restroom and a few stalls down a woman is going to town on that potty. And my daughter very loudly says, "Oh my goodness. Mommy. Some lady is pooping. She's pooping so loud. She has waterfall poops. Maybe I'll take her some extra wipes so she's clean." Okay? And I'm like SSSHH. SHHHHHH. No. You're not taking anyone wipes. Just mind your own business. And she goes, "Hey Miss Lady. You need to flush. It'll stink less." That would be the day I found out that my husband taught my daughter about courtesy flushing. My son is 2 and completely obsessed with bobs, which he calls boops. So I'm in our tiny little local grocery store and this very young gal is walking around with a shirt so low that everything except her nipples were showing. I'm not prude at all. But it was excessive. As soon as my little guy sees her he starts yelling "Boops. Boops." And pointing at her. I apologized and walked away. For some reason she thought it was a good idea to get in line behind us and my son just sat there in the cart yelling "Boops boopies boops" over and over again. The more I tried to get him to shush, the louder he got and the more he laughed. Pretty soon a bunch of people were standing around laughing while I tried to get my groceries and get out. He talked about boobs for days afterwards. As a toddler he pulled the fire alarm in a hospital community center hallway, forcing the entire building full of mostly very old people with walkers and canes to evacuate out into the winter rain. I called 911 and explained what happened so they didn't send a fire truck. The only thing keeping me from being a puddle of shame as a parent was the fact that he was not the first toddler to do this. After a few more toddlers did the same thing, the hospital finally put plastic covers over the fire alarms. Only very mildly embarrassing. But I went to the local liquor store and, while pushing around a cart loaded with wine and beer and this and that, my then quite young daughter shouted out, "Prediction. My mummy is going to have a dinner party soon." Everybody in the shop turned to smile at the sweet little preschooler whose mother apparently got her friends boozed up on the regular. Around the house, my husband and I will playfully slap each other's butts in passing when the other is bent over doing something. When I was walking through the grocery store with my daughter, about 4 at the time, we passed a very large woman bent down looking at a display. My daughter slapped her butt as we walked by and I had a very difficult time not giggling while I apologized. My little cousin did this one time at a fast food restaurant. He needed to use the restroom and so I followed him over to that side of the restaurant. On the way there was a line of people waiting to order. He walked by and very casually slapped 3 butts including a much older lady's. Didn't say anything. Just spanked them and kept walking. I was the child in the story. My sister's 15 years older than me and loved telling it to embarrass me in my teenage years. But when I was 2-3 years old I pretty much sexually harassed everyone. I'd approach people that would come to the house and declare I have a tallywhacker. Wanna see? Problem is, it was completely rhetorical. My tallywhacker was already out in plain view and in my hand. There was no thanks option. You were going to see my tallywhacker. The habit got broken in my younger years. But I still managed to make an extremely cringe-worthy one-liner of it in my teenage years when one of her friends from high school she hadn't seen in years was visiting at a time I was home too. She laughed and recognized me. And having been shown my wedding tackle plenty in my younger years laughed and asked if I was still parading my tallywhacker in front of everyone these days. To which I responded, why? Would you like to see? I'd have to say when my 4-year-old daughter found my wife's dildo in her dresser and brought it downstairs at her birthday party saying, "Mommy, what's this?" Got quite a laugh from the guests. My wife said that's a doll leg and took it from her. We got a metal lockbox for our toys later that day. Also not a parent. But my brother was at the airport with his wife and daughter when she decided to do what most hyped up 3-year-olds do and run off to explore. So my brother goes chasing her so she doesn't get lost and she suddenly starts crying and screaming, "No. I want my mommy. No." at the top of her lungs while sprinting away from him. He got a lot of suspicious looks. In a busy Target with my 2-year-old son. And while shopping I had to fart. So we went down a vacant aisle to look for something. Managed to keep it sounding like an extremely soft punt of a slightly underinflated football. If anyone heard it on the aisle over, they could have thought it was anything. But we can go on shopping. Nope. Next thing I hear is a loud child's voice as giddy as only a 2-year-old's voice can be. "Daddy, you farted." Hahaha. Instinctually I went into damage control mode. Had to loudly say no I didn't. In between multiple loudspeaker volume accusations to convince any nearbyers. As we left the aisle, a lady exiting the aisle over briefly looked my way. I could see her holding in her laugh. Edit. Words. My brother was good at this. We were once at a restaurant visiting my grandparents. And the waitress was taking our drink order. My brother, who was probably 7 or 8 at the time, had just learned about our father's lactose intolerance. The waitress asks for my dad's drink and he starts to say something when my brother interrupts and very seriously tells the waitress, no matter what he says, do not give him milk, or else it will make him fart. Our other grandparents were taking him through the grocery store when he was 4 or so. And my grandpa was, and is, very fond of pull my finger jokes, which he made around my brother all the time. So my brother has to rip one and he holds out his hand and tells my grandpa to pull his finger. Grandpa of course refuses. So he says, "Okay. Fine. I'll pull it myself." He also once got us kicked out of a theme park at age 7 or so because he got separated from my mom somehow. Had to go to the bathroom. And rather than go find the actual building that the bathroom was in, dropped trow and started pissing into a potted plant. This was also a habit picked up from grandpa, as they live in a very secluded area on several acres, and when he was working outside would just go in the woods rather than go all the way back up to the house. I used to embarrass her all the time when I was a very small child because I figured out that if we got separated in a store and I started to cry, people would give me candy. So I learned how to cry on command and would purposefully run away. Run up to the help desk and tell them that I'd lost my mommy and start crying. She would inevitably come collect me and find me with a lollipop and a very self-satisfied smile. The worst thing my kids have ever done is poop outside of the litter box and wake me up barking at 2 in the morning. Had a summer romance years ago with German dude. We reconnected via Facebook. He came to visit last year. His daughter, 14. Me and my son, 12, went out for a meal. We had garlic bread for starters but I passed on it. When German asked me to try I said oh. I'm not eating bread at the moment and fluttered my eyelashes. Son blurts out yeah. She ate a load of it last week and she was farting in the car all day. German fell off the seat laughing. I was at the mall once with my dad and he started singing the Teletubbies theme song loudly just to make me embarrassed. Imagine a man in his late 40s running around screaming Tinky Winky. He counts as a child. When my sister was around 5 my mom really liked a series on YouTube about a skeleton puppet thing, Ahmed. She also let me and my sister watch it. I don't really remember it. But he said silence I hear you a lot. My sister thought that was the funniest thing so whenever anyone would ask her a question she'd respond with silence I hear you. We weren't allowed to watch it anymore after she yelled it at church. Older sister here. We were at Disney with my 2 younger brothers. Aged 6 and 3 at the time. I was 16. Mom and I would alternate taking care of the kids so the other could go to roller coasters and other stuff the kids couldn't ride. It was my turn to take care of them and they were frantic. The oldest one was trying to climb on the rails organizing the lines for the ride. I turned to tell him not to do that. When I turned back to the youngest, he had his pants and underpants down and was playing with his big dig while staring a 5-year-old girl that looked absolutely terrified. The girl's father was red and looked very angry. I immediately ran away from that ride with my brothers while listening to people whisper about how teen moms can't take care of their kids properly and how young I was to be mother of 2. TLDR, younger brother showed his big dig to little girl on Disney ride. My little brother asked a black woman at the grocery store why her legs were white. She was wearing stockings. She asked him why his legs were blue. Not a parent but nanny. We're at the swimming pool and there's only me and the 3 kids in the children's pool. The lifeguard has been flirting with me a little bit when the eldest child swims up to me and punches me straight in the vajayjay whilst shouting loudly that he got me right in the willy. I tried my best to laugh it off but man do kids know how to show you up. For reference I'm female and do not, nor have ever had, a willy. My 3-year-old was supposedly asleep in my arms as I was talking to an acquaintance about my wife's upcoming birthday. I offhand mentioned I'm old enough to be her dad. Note that my wife sometimes calls me daddy, not in that context you perverts. Well, not all the time in that context, when she's referring to me while talking to the littler kids. I guess 3-year-old overheard. Because later she pops up her little head and asks in that piercing 3-year-old voice, Daddy. If you're also mama's daddy, does that mean you're my daddy and my grandpa Dart? We were at the mall and my 3-year-old daughter kept walking over to the railing. We were on the 2nd floor and looking down, or so I thought. I noticed a man make a face when he looked at her and when I got over I realized she was spitting down onto the floor below us. Not a parent. But we went to a restaurant. And my youngest brother, I think 5 at the time, finally got an adult-sized soda. He spilled it. And it got all over the table. Before he could ask for more napkins, he started slurping the soda off the table and exclaimed really loudly, I'm a vacuum. At that same restaurant a year later, he exclaimed out of nowhere, I farted. The people at the tables near us laughed. The day after my mother died I took my son to see Santa. He was almost 2. And we had spent the last week hanging out in an ICU waiting room. You know, cause my mother was dying. Fun fact about hospitals. Lot of sick people there. And of course my son caught a bug. Nothing major. Just a cold. Well, my mother loved Christmas, and the day after she died happened to be the first day the local mall had Santa, and so as a weird homage to her I took my son. He threw up on Santa. Chunky gross toddler puke. I don't know if you know this, dear gentle strangers of the internet, but when your primary diet is dairy, your puke is like Satan's cottage cheese on ducking Santa. I was 5 and for the longest time I would sing eeny meeny miny mo wrong. Instead of catch a tiger by the toe I'd say catch a rennet by the toe, and my parents would always scold me, but I never caught on. I once said this in front of our beloved black friends Avir and they were mortified. I was grocery shopping with my 2-year-old and there was a woman there with extremely curly and long black hair. She was wearing a long trench coat and heeled boots that made that loud clacking noise while she walked. The first time my daughter saw her she yelled "AHHHH monster" and pointed straight at the poor woman. She just sort of laughed it off while I apologized and hurried down the aisle. Well, I kid you not, we must have seen her in every damn aisle after that. Every time with the same reaction from my daughter. She even started recognizing the clacking of her boots and her eyes would get big while she would yell "monsters coming" before we could even see the woman. The woman was very nice about it, but I was mortified and tried to avoid wherever she was in the store. It made for a long grocery trip. Damn kids. Pulled his shirt up and showed the cashier his knees, nipples, then tried to pull down my top while yelling "Mama have big knees." I'm ginger already. Have never in my life been so red. Monochrome is apparently achievable. Not a parent but my cousin, who was about 3/4 at the time. We were in the supermarket shopping for general groceries when my cousin suddenly says she needs to go poo poo. My auntie says okay sure, we will go in 2 minutes, it's at the end of this aisle. Well, my cousin clearly didn't have too much patience as me and had noticed at the same time that there were 2 very round brown squishy gonads of poop on the floor dropping down her pants leg. They just kept dropping one after another. And I was doing everything in my power to not laugh and attract attention. Before I knew it, a woman pushing a trolley turned down the aisle, completely oblivious to the fact there's fresh little gonads on the floor, and runs her trolley into one of them. I was about to burst when my cousin blurts out, "Why is that lady driving on my poo?" I couldn't hold my laughter anymore and immediately ran and waited in the car and just laughed for 5 minutes straight. When I was about 5, my dad had me at Home Depot, and I watched one of the forklifts. It backed up and made that beeping noise, and I asked why it was doing that. My father explains it's because when it backs up, it needs to warn people so it doesn't run over them, because the driver can't see what's behind him very well. It made sense. We get our stuff. Time to check out. We get in line and stand there for a few seconds. Suddenly, the cell phone rings in the pocket of a rather rotund, quite fat lady in front of us. As it starts beeping, 5-year-old me shouts, "Look out. She's backing up." Dad thought it was hilarious. Lady was very offended. Took our 18-mo to the playground. We encourage her to play with other kids so she can pick up some social skills early on. On this particular day, she was playing with a toddler who appeared to be going through some kind of chemotherapy. So our daughter goes up to this child, looks at his head, touches it, then looks right back at us and points and laughs. Such internal struggle. Wanting to simultaneously disappear but also grab her and profusely apologize to the child and his parents. We were sitting in a booth at a restaurant, and my 3-year-old was peeking over the back at the people behind us. He hollers, "Hey, why is this guy bald?" I pull him down and quietly explain that we don't comment on people's appearances, because we don't know if something we say might hurt their feelings. He asks me, if I have a question though, can I ask quietly? And I answer him, yes. If you have a question about somebody, you can whisper it in my ear. Before I realize what's happening, my son leans down over the man's shoulder and whispers in his ear, "Why are you bald?" I was just barely 3 when my parents were driving us back from the coast. Suddenly my mother exclaimed to my father, "Oh no. I forgot my vibrator." So we turned around and went back to the hotel. I've been quiet the whole time. But once my mother began explaining to the front desk clerk that they left something in the hotel room, I loudly asked, "Mommy, what's a vibrator?" At the airport. Holding my toddler. Waiting in line to board. Suddenly she buffs all over me. Everyone in the vicinity saw. As they were all looking around. Trying to see who was making a horrifying retching noise. Cleaned it up the best I could. But I smelled like buff for the remaining 5 hours of travel.